Välkomna till Aktiespararnas aktiedag här i Stockholm idag den 7 september 2021. Mitt namn är Peter Malmström och jag kommer efter presentationen att prata lite med bolagets vd här. Och det går också alldeles utmärkt för er åhörare att ställa de frågor som ni vill ha svar på. Och hur ni gör det lättast kommer att framgå på skärmen framför er. Ni skickar in frågan här så ser vi den och så kommer vi att se till att den ställs. Vi kommer nu att lyssna på Gabather, bolaget som står näst för att presentera sig. Och det är bolagets vd Michael-Robin Witt som kommer att ta oss igenom bolagets spännande framtid. Välkommen och varsågod Michael.
Tack så mycket. Thank you very much. I will give this presentation in English, and all the questions following up, I will do them in Swedish, of course, after the presentation. So, thanks for the opportunity to present in Gabather, and it will give a snapshot picture of our company. We've been around for a number of years, since 2014. The name Gabather comes from GABA Therapeutics, and what we're doing is we're developing therapies against mental disorders, and I'm going to give a short presentation and a snapshot situation on where we are now with Gabather 2021. And if one takes a step back on what area we're working in, we are working very much in the area of cognition. And cognition is the way we understand the world. And as you see in this slide, the cognition is the interaction between an experience that we see from the outside world and how we process this experience through both emotions and reason and the reaction to this world. And if there's a dysfunction or a problem in the cognitive aspects, we of course will have problems in understanding and reacting in a proper way to the external world, and then we will have mental disorders, mental dysfunction. As you can see in this slide, it's difficult to understand the world around us. And this cognitive function is what we are targeting with our new therapies primarily. Not only, but primarily. And altered cognition or deficiency in cognition is an abundance of indications within the CNS, the central nervous system, and the diseases we work on, and the indications that we are interested in. So you can see in ranging on of indications, everything from depression, schizophrenia, anxiety, all of them involved altered cognition, all of them involved problems with memory, problems with learning. And the number of patients worldwide suffering from mental health problems, mental health disorders, is certainly around 320 million at the minimum, and it depends very much on how you define mental health issues. For example, if you include substance abuse disorders, this number is of course much, much higher, and it also depends what age groups you're looking at. So if you look at this slide there, we've made a table and looked at different disorders, different mental health problems in the top row, and you can see that the symptoms that the patients that experience these disorders are very varied, but if we highlight it in red, cognition is a deficit in cognition goes through most of these mental disorders. So it's a very interesting and very relevant symptom to address. And this is what we're doing with our therapies that we are currently developing with our clinical candidate G2002, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more later on. So of course, cognitive deficits are more or less serious, more or less pronounced. In diseases like Alzheimer's disease, it's of course obvious that cognitive deficits is a tremendous impact. In other diseases, it's perhaps not that prominent, but still there. And even in healthy aging, everybody knows that the older we get, it's maybe more difficult to remember things, and maybe it takes a little bit longer time to learn new things. So it's a part of a normal process of the brain, which is of course very acute in certain disorders and very abnormal in disorders like Alzheimer's disease. The treatments for mental disorders in general, they of course have been developments for the last many, many years. The problem that we're actually addressing with our project is that many of the treatments that we have today do have a number of side effects. And this can be side effects from either having no effect at all. Many diseases actually don't respond to the treatments that you have, which is the second bullet point on this particular slide. Many of the treatments take a long time to actually work in the patient, so it is a delay in the therapeutic effect, or they have a very large, in some instances, very serious side effects. This can be anything from very severe weight gain, to insomnia, to loss of libido, to concentration problems, and so on. And the cognitive deficits may persist even though you might address and solve some of the other symptoms, but you will still have problems with cognition. And of course, many of the drugs that are on the market right now have a rather unselective, a very general effect on the brain. It targets different receptor neurotransmitter systems in the brain. And then in general, one can say the more general an effect is on the brain, the more side effects you will have, most probably. And GABA stands for, it's an acronym for gamma-aminobutyric acid. It's a small molecule. It's very important in the brain. And in this particular slide, I've simplified this to an extreme. If you compare it to a car, the brain that is, the GABA would be the brake system, the system that inhibits, that slows down, that modulates the brain activity. The other receptor system on the right-hand side is a receptor system called glutamate, which is excitatory. It stimulates, it activates the brain. And a healthy brain has, of course, in the same way as a healthy way of driving a car, a balance between inhibition and excitation, a balance, a homeostasis between brake and acceleration. And this is not to say, of course, that there are many, many other neurotransmitters in the brain that are extremely relevant to other CNS disorders and therapeutics, such as, for example, dopamine, which is a target of many antipsychotic compounds, and of course, serotonin in the field of antidepressants. But we focus on GABA, and GABA name comes from GABA therapeutics, because we only target the GABA receptor system. So what we're doing is we develop very selective compounds, selective in the sense they only interact with the GABA-A receptor system. That means that the more selective they are, the less prone they will be to side effects. And they're very potent compounds, i.e. you need relatively low, we expect to use very low doses in patients later on to get the same effect. But the lower the doses you have, of course, the lower the chances of side effects. So what does our compound do? It enhances the activity of the inhibitory nerve cells in the brain, and it relieves, in the models that we have done preclinically so far, cognitive deficits. So if you remember the slides previously that I showed at the beginning, the problem of cognition, of realizing the world through your experience, then what we're doing, problem we're solving now with our drug GT002, we actually reactivate the homeostasis and cognition. And as you can see, once you have a functioning cognitive system in the brain, your reaction to the outside world through the experience that you received in will be normalized, and you can actually respond to the real world in a normal, if you can paraphrase that, way again. And that's where you have the therapeutic effect. The market is responding. The medical need is so a big question. It's huge. You can throw a lot of very large numbers around. CNS drug development is a very difficult field. It's very tricky because the models that we have for CNS disorders are very, very complicated. It's difficult to modulate human behavior and human activity in other models preclinically. You know, it's not like developing a drug that lowers blood sugar where you measure the blood sugar. If you work on a drug trying to alleviate depression, you have to work with scales, you have to work with ratings, and it's much more subjective than that. So it's tricky, it's difficult, but it's very rewarding. The potential in this project is, of course, very big. And ongoing trials are relatively few. There's been a little bit of a, I would say, downsizing, at least downgrading activity of many of the CNS projects because they were so difficult. The potential is there, and I think we have an example from, I believe, November last year. I think it's on the next slide, where American company Biogen acquired a drug candidate from a biotech company, actually quite large biotech company, Sage Therapeutics, which actually targets, and this is why we have this example there, the GABA-A receptor in the same way that our project portfolio does, our compound portfolio does. And it's a phase 3 project, I believe, targeting depression for this particular receptor, for this particular drug. And they acquired it for multi-million dollars to develop within Biogen. So the market pool is there. It's a question of we can actually supply the market with the candidates that they need, that are required. And this is a rather busy slide, and I will focus on the cartoon on the right, because many times I get the question, well, how do you actually measure memory and learning in models? And I have given you a model on the right-hand side. You see on the top cartoon, there's a rodent. It's a naturally curious animal. It investigates 2 objects, one pink, one green, in the little box on the top. And then you exchange the pink object for a light blue one and the bottom 2 ones, and this animal is intelligent. It remembers. I have investigated the green one already before. I'm not interested in that anymore. I have remembered that memory. So I will investigate the new object, which is the light blue one, a little bit longer. And what you do is then you measure how long time does the animal investigate the 2 objects, and if it has actually a good memory or an improved memory, it will investigate the new object with much more curiosity in longer time than the old object. So it's a very nice model. I like it because it actually makes use of the natural curiosity and the natural behavior of an animal. I think it's very interesting. For GT002, it would be a first-in-class modulator of cognition for the GABA-A receptor. There are some compounds that have been claimed to have an effect on it, but not of the same type, i.e. a positive allosteric modulator. And based on the preclinical studies, we're quite confident this can be an interesting effect. We have undergone a phase 1 clinical program. We've tested this 2 times, 2 clinical trials, single ascending dose, multiple ascending dose in healthy volunteers. We have seen good effects. We have seen no side effects. We have seen no events that cause any concern. On the contrary, we have seen very good pharmaceutical properties. We have developed our own formulation of this particular new drug for investigation, and we have seen very good pharmacokinetic properties. The drug is taken up, given orally for once daily. It's in the bloodstream, ready for and it's also metabolized in a very physiological way, I would say. So it also leaves the body again, so there's no chance of it accumulating and that way having deleterious effects. We have 2 patent families. The compound originated actually for many years ago from research at the University of Lund and University of Copenhagen, where the compounds were synthesized. The compounds we work with are actually synthesized in small scale here in Sweden, in our labs, and at large scale within Europe. And the clinical trials that we have performed, they're also within Europe, within the European networks. We have been very careful with IP. We have been very good, I think, covering composition of matter, but we've also covered for our lead compound the synthesis, the synthetic process which we improved, and we've also patented our own formulation that we developed actually in-house in our own R&D, which was actually a bottleneck in the development of this drug and a big success, a very silent one, but some success we're very proud of actually. So the successful phase 1 studies, they open, of course, the door. Now we know the drug is well tolerated. These were double-blinded trials, so neither the investigator nor the volunteer knew if they were getting the drug or not. Good tolerability, robust safety. The compound, the medical product is stable, so you can use it for longer time. It is very well bioavailable and has a promising pharmacodynamic and pharmacokinetic profile, which we're still investigating, and metabolic studies and the metabolite identification that we've done has been actually very interesting. So this is a very interesting compound. What is the next step? We stand now. Before I attended this meeting, we just released a press release that we're going to start a clinical trial, so-called target engagement study in the brain. We want to look in healthy volunteers. We give the drug orally. We're going to study 2 parameters, very important one, EEG, electroencephalogram. We'll look at the electrical activity. How does GT002 modulate the activity in the brain compared to a placebo, i.e. sugar pill, or to a comparator drug, so we know it activates the brain, and with fMRI, which stands for functional magnetic imaging, resonance imaging, where we look where in the brain this changes will be induced. So for us, it's a stepping stone. It's actually a gateway study, because with the data that we have there, we will open then the possibility of doing different clinical trials, maybe with different partners, but depending on the data that we get and depending on the indications the potential partners are interested in. So this is a very important last bullet point. It's a milestone to initiate partnership negotiations. And further. Clinical trial, we have put EEG in the very much in the center, because EEG reflecting activity in the brain is of course center for all of the indication that you can see in this slide. And we want to use this as a biomarker, i.e. an indicator of the biological activity of our compound GT002. And of course, it will be even more interesting once we go into patients to see interaction between our compound and other drugs that the patient might already be being treated with, so as an add-on therapy in the future. This is our milestones, our history of GT002, where we stand now at the very edge of the target engagement study, and then planning to go either with a partner or on our own to patient studies within the next year or the year after that, depending on the data that we get out of the target engagement study, which we are initiating now. We are at the same time, of course, I must underline this, that we have pushed very much in our pipeline GT002 into the clinic as quick as possible. This is where the interest in the investor, the market is. Of course, it makes sense. We do have, of course, a pipeline of other compounds that are still at the preclinical level, which we want to move on now, that with the third clinical trial of GT002 at the same time in our labs that we have in Södertälje towards preclinical in vitro and in vivo models, and then nominate a candidate drug of a second compound series or a candidate drug of the compound series of the same as GT002. So just to underline and to actually print in bold that these are not compounds that we license in, we push it down the development line and then license it out again. These are compounds that are synthesized in our labs and put all the way into the clinic. So it's really a classical case of a lab bench to bedside kind of activity we're in. So this is actually something we're quite proud of too. And this one, I just want to mention two things. One is the interest in, of course, in these days is in long COVID. We know that COVID has CNS effects. We have not done any research there yet. We've been contacted by a few groups that are interested. They know that our compound is CNS active. Could it have effects on COVID symptoms like brain fog and so on? We don't know, but it's interesting. We have clinical trial material. We have people that are interested in including us in their potential studies. And again, I want to again also underline that we have a library of compounds that we actually can base on. So it's not a question of having a key. It's a question of having a machine that can make many more keys, because we have the model of the receptor. We can literally synthesize new compounds as we see fit, as we develop our model, actually refine our model more and more. And we're working very much towards partnering for the next development stages, be it clinical trials or further on for the commercialization steps. And then this is actually my last slide, which I see with 1 minute and 30 seconds left of the talk. It's actually quite nice timing. I just want to introduce, of course, the team. This is a team effort. We are actually very few people, if you think about it. And the management team, we are 4 people, 3 people that are actually in the lab. And we're pushing a project of large pharma size along, which is actually very good. And we have a basis on a very experienced board of directors, which keeps a check on our activities and stimulates us. And I have, just before I came here, a very nice video which I just snatched from the internet, and I don't know if this is going to work, but you should see a very nice slice of an MRI imaging. No, I have to leave it without it. It doesn't work to get it started here. No, so I just leave it with that, and I thank you for your attention.
Tack så mycket. Mycket spännande. Ett ämne som jag tror att många känner igen på ett eller annat sätt och ett ämne som berör många.
Ja.
Och det leder in mig på den första frågan. Er forskning, är den lika uppskattad och de förväntade resultaten, är de lika emotsedda i alla delar utav världen, eller finns det marknader som kanske har ett större engagemang och som väntar med större spänning på det som komma skall? Vad jag försöker säga, är det lika uppskattat i exempelvis England som i Kina, eller är det i Indien betydligt mer uppskattat än i andra marknader? Bara för att ge 3 exempel på olika geografiska marknader.
Det är kanske beroende på i vilken fas av utveckling en viss region befinner sig i. Ta till exempel intresse i Kina i kognitiv enhancing och terapi mot Alzheimer är enormt stor. För det är levnadsåldern i Kina ökar, Alzheimer ökar, så kommer det se mycket mer intresse. Ett annat intresse är till exempel i USA med problem med Oxycontin och drug abuse, substansmissbruk. Där är selvfølgelig intresse jättestora institutioner som NIDA till exempel. Har du en substans som kan kanske ta bort suget, kravet efter droger. Så det beror på vilken region du pratar om.
Okay.
Men generellt är ju en sjukdom som schizofreni, det är utbrett i ungefär 1% av befolkningen över hela världen. Så intressen är selvfølgelig lika stora, men möjligheterna till terapeutisk nöd, det är mycket olika i olika länder.
Men jag tänker också på att i vissa kulturer så pratar man om den här typen av problem på ett annat sätt. Exempelvis. Och det gör att man kanske följer saker och ting på lite olika sätt i olika
absolut, jag menar
kulturer.
Mental hälsa är ju på gränsen till kulturen. Det finns ju en orsak varför till exempel suicid är så utbrett i Sydkorea och Japan. Det är ett kulturellt fenomen också.
Ja. Okej. Du, covid och corona har ju säkert påverkat er också.
Ja.
Stämmer det, eller har det påverkat er mindre, eller har det varit ett stort problem som ni ser att det kommer bli mer och mer hanterbart nu? Eller?
Nej, jag menar, det har varit ett problem för alla, också för oss. Det har varit problem att allt går långsammare. Men på ett annat sätt, det kommer ju att vara de lång covid-symptomer som kommer att bli mycket relevanta nu inom de kommande år. De akuta infektionssjukdomar, symptomen, de kommer att försvinna så småningom med vaccin. Men de långtidssymptomer i CNS, de är mycket relevanta. Ja. Så de kommer att vara, och intressen är stora. Och kanske kan covid påverka kliniska studier, eftersom det är så många kliniska studier som kan köras med covid-medicin nu. Ja, det kan inte svårt för andra. Så det är liksom en run på faciliteter för att köra kliniska studier.
Okay.
Och det kommer att öka säkert.
När man forskar så vill man gärna skydda sina saker. Jag tänker på patent, IP, du var inne på det lite grann.
Ja.
Kan du berätta lite mer, hur ser ni på det, hur arbetar man med det och hur långt kommit det och hur långt sträcker de sig för det?
Vår filosofi det är från oss, vi har en mycket trevlig patentadvokat och han har så en filosofi, han jämför det med en lök. Du ska alltså ha en efter den annan sfär. Så det första är vår composition of matter. Ett annat är hur man syntetiserar substansen. En tredje är hur du formulerar substansen. Och en fjärde är vilken indikationer ska du använda substansen till. Och hur ska du forska och få data så du kan också patentera detta. Så det är på det sättet, precis med GT002, som vi har gjort väldigt fokuserad insats på patentsidan.
Okay.
Till exempel använt det vad vi hade lärt oss under syntesen för att förenkla syntesen, göra det mer ekonomiskt viable och så patentera det nya sätt. Så har du en syntes som tar 12 steg, nu har vi en syntes som tar 6. Så har du sparat mycket tid och pengar.
Okay. Forskning kostar pengar. Ni har relativt nyligen tagit in pengar, om jag har förstått det rätt.
Ja, det var 2 år sedan.
Ja, okej. Hur ser det ut här framåt? Behöver ni pengar fylla på kassan?
Alltså alla de projekt jag har beskrivit här eller aktiviteter jag beskrivit här, de är alla in i vår budget. Och jag vill inte spekulera på framtida investeringar. Jag får faktiskt inte spekulera på framtida investeringar.
Okej. Jaha. Du, om man tittar 22 eller 1 till 2 år, säg 24 månader framåt i tiden. Hur ser du att bolaget ser ut och vad har hänt då? Och det för också mig in på möjligheten för investerare att följa bolaget och se att där ska hända det här, det ska hända och det ska hända. Det är lite lättare för dem att följa med och
alltså, om man tittar 24 månader fram så vill jag, okej, nu är det ju önsketänkning.
Ja,
det
lite grann,
var optimistisk. Så vill jag bara GT002-projektet var utlicensierat i en större partner. Jag hoppas att den partner är igång med en klinisk studie med större antal patienter, en indikation. Det vet jag inte. Det beror på vad partnern eller vi tillsammans kommer överens om. Och vi har 1-2 kandidater som är på väg till kliniken eller in i kliniken själva och har fått investera i vår förhållning. Och så har vi kört vår pipeline vidare. Som sagt, det är inte bara en produkt vi har. Men vi kan syntetisera fler molekyler. Och det vad vi har lärt oss under processen med GT002, det kan vi använda på mycket efficient sätt i de nya projekten. Alltså att vi ska inte göra det samma misstag en gång till.
Nej. Så allting kan dra nytta av era erfarenheter framåt.
Ja. Och partners, nätverk vi har byggt upp, partnerskap vi har byggt upp som vi hade inte innan. Som de är på plats och det kommer att gå snabbare än GT002.
Ja. Är det någonting som mot förmodan kan gå snett? Är det någon risk i något av projekten och vad skulle den i så fall vara? Är det någonting som kan visa sig inte stämma överhuvudtaget bland era projekt eller hur ser du på riskerna?
Den allra största risk, och det är kanske generiskt för alla läkemedelsprojekt, är att substansen har inte den effekt i den indikation vi tror på.
Okay.
Och det är så variabelt att det kan absolut vara, men jag tror eftersom vi går ju efter ett mycket centralt neurotransmittersystem, så jag tror på att det är upp till oss och vår kreativitet och intelligens att hitta den indikation som den substans kan användas till på ett bra terapeutiskt sätt. Selv om vi kanske misslyckas med den första. Så jag är i den sensen optimistisk. Men man ska vara straightforward att CNS-projektet är till och med inom läkemedelsutvecklingsprojektet. Jag vill ta den upp i den svåra kategori. På grund av det vad jag nämnde tidigare, att modellerna är svåra. Vi vet inte, det är mycket forskning kvar om hjärnans aktivitet och påverkar den. Patologin av många sjukdomar är inte helt klarlagt. Schizofreni är en klassisk exempel. Vad det är egentligen orsaken till det är ingen som så det är mycket då man kan adressera symptomer och undvika biverkningar.
Du visade också en slide här på er organisation.
Ja.
Det är en kompakt organisation.
Ja. Och
sen antar jag att ni har en del konsulter och köper in en del kompetens utifrån.
Vi har en del konsulter och som du såg i sliden, vi har ett väldigt stort nätverk. Vi har ganska mycket erfaren. Så det är faktiskt ett nätverk som är nästan globalt. Alltså, vi har varit med i det här business i 30-40 år. Jag tror tillsammans har vi säkert mer än 100 års erfarenhet, så vi har självklart massor av både CROs, konsulter, akademiska nätverk som är viktigt i det här sammanhanget för att komma ut. Och det är den kärnorganisation väldigt kompakt men stor nätverk.
Stor nätverk.
Ja, det är det enda sättet att göra det. Du måste komma ihåg att ibland får jag fråga att folk, varför går det inte snabbare? Reglerna, till exempel när du går till Läkemedelsverket, vi har samma regler som AstraZeneca eller Pfizer eller en multimiljard koncern. reglerna och standards och guidelines är detsamma för oss som för alla andra.
Okej. Stort tack för att du kom hit idag.
Ja, men jag tackar.
Lycka till. Mycket spännande.
Tack så mycket.
Tack så mycket.